For this lab, we're going to take a look at the 5-minute code for Lab 6b2, and what we're going to do is some updates to it. If we look at the two problems, first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at the 5-minute code from Lab 6.1b, and the modification that we're going to make is printing 10 items on each line, so it looks a little bit neater as we display the information. And then for problem number 2, we're going to do the same thing. This was done with the even numbers, so we're also going to print the 10 items on each line. Let's go ahead and take a look at the flow chart and see how we're going to do it. There's going to be actually two ways, one for the even, one for the odd. So for the odd one, we'll start out by looking at establishing our loop for utilizing a for loop and establishing our range. And this is going to be our counter. So if our counter is less than 9, so that means we have less than 9 items on the line, we're going to utilize this print statement. So we have a comma and a space, and we also have a counter to increase by 1. So our counter is going to be up here where it's going to be a value of 0 to start off with, and this will keep on looping until it gets to 9. When it reaches 9, what's going to happen, it's going to print the value without the comma, reset the counter back to 0, and then it continues on with the for loop. For the even ones, this is our beginning, utilizing our for loop and our updated range. And this time we're doing something slightly different. So if x%20 is equal to 0, and what this is identifying, that we're going to be dividing by 20, and if the remainder is 0, then we're going to print out the value without the comma. Otherwise, continue with the loop and utilize the print statement with a comma and a space, and this value loop around until the value is going to be divisible by 20 and there's no remainder. It will true until this loop finishes off, and then it will exit out of the loop. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the code and how the syntax is going to look. On problem 1, we're going to start out with a counter of 0 that we're going to be utilizing. Next, we have our for loop. And if you recall, we're going to have a if counter. So if counter is less than 9, then we're going to print the number with the comma and a space. Once we do that, then we need to increment the counter by 1. Next, we're going to do our else statement. We're going to print the value of x, because that will be our 10th value and it'll be end of the line. And then we'll have the counter reset back to 0. So when we run this code, we'll take a look to see how it looks. As you can see, our output, it prints out 10 items, and at the end there is no comma. Then continues on with the next one, and at the end there's no comma. And same thing with all the values. So that was for part 1. Let's take a look at part number 2. With problem number 2, we'll start out with our for loop and range. And then we'll go to the if statement. So if %20, so if it's divisible by 20 and the remainder is 0, then we'll print the last value. Otherwise, will print out the number with a comma and a space. So let's go ahead and run the code and see what the output is going to be for number 2. So you can see for our output, starts out with the even number and it continues on to 20. There's no comma at the end. Prints out another row, etc., all the way down to 100. So that's how we end up doing this particular lab.